it was not cool or interesting to drop out of college. It was still kind of a stupid thing to do. And so it was a little bit more accepted because if you were in the tech world, it was kind of cool in the tech world to drop out of college. But it was still like when I told my friends, they were just like, "You actually did it?" Like that's you don't do it. Like you go to Stanford and you drop out, but you don't not go to Harvard or Stanford and drop out. Like just not going to college was a very different thing than dropping out from a prestigious college. Um, and, like, that was kind of I didn't really think about that. I'm like, "I don't have Stanford on my resume. I don't have Harvard on my resume." Like, I didn't go to a prestigious college and then drop out and say, "Well, look, like, I went to this cool place." So it was kinda scary. I didn't have any like, the tech world, as much as they don't care about a college degree, they do love if you went to a great college.
The Research Labs podcast by SundayPyjamas.
Spencer, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for spending this time. I have been, using the product a little bit to understand how you might have gone about the design of the product, and so I have questions around that. And Build Better looks very intuitive. Now that I think about it, it's very, I would say, yeah, that makes sense, kind of a product. But how about we kind of discuss like how you got started, how were you in college, like what were the things you were interested in usually?
I mean, I think my dad was a big product fanatic growing up. Um, he loved products, and we always got the latest Mac or the latest Apple product, anything sound related to. If it wasn't worth having, if it wasn't like a great product, then it wasn't worth having. So that didn't mean that we got everything. It just meant that like we just wouldn't get it if we couldn't get the right version of it. We couldn't get the best version of it. And I think there was kind of a misnomer, and I think that misnomer still exists today around great products have to be expensive. Often quality products are more expensive, but they are not the most expensive. There's kind of like luxurious or luxe items, and then there's like quality items. And quality items are more expensive than the average product, but they're never the most expensive. That's kind of in the luxurious category. Um, and my family kind of had a philosophy of like buy once, cry once, which is basically the idea that like you're gonna cry when you buy it because it's gonna be more money than you thought you wanted to spend. But that's the only crying you're gonna do because you're not gonna cry every single time you have to use the product because it's crap, because it doesn't work as well, because it doesn't turn on when it's supposed to turn on, because there's not a lot of support issues. And so this whole buy once, cry once was a huge philosophy. And I think I was surrounded by such great products. I was always curious about how products got built. I was always obsessed with like, well, what went into building those products? What did it take to build great products? And I started my first software company. I mean, actually, before that, I started a review website about other people's products, and that did really well. We had like 1.5 million views the first month. We did like YouTube, we did like articles, and this was like back when like YouTube was very early on. It was kind of easy to get like views in these types of platforms because there just wasn't that much saturation. So it sounds like a big number, but at this time it was like one of my videos that was my most popular video was like how to add music to an Android phone. And that was like a massively successful video, hundreds of thousands of views. Because there's just nothing else out there that did that, right? Like that was the only kind of products that people would be able to watch, and like I was the only one who did something like that. So um, from that, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. I love reviewing products. I want to build something. So I ended up building a tool back when Android was really in its infancy. There was no way of backing up apps on your phone. So built an app called App List. And it basically, you clicked on it. It was a huge effing button. You clicked on it, and it would save all of the apps on your phone to a list, just like their APK file. And it would save it to your SD card. So when you got a new phone, you could kind of load that list and see all the apps that you needed to re-download. I think at one point we might have helped you kind of find those apps on the App Store and install them. And that was a hugely successful app as well. Like we got hundreds of thousands of downloads. It was featured by a few places as like a need to have app, just because there was no way of doing it. So I started to fall in love with like building products and seeing customers' reaction. From there, when I was like 14 years old, I started my first software company. And that was called Unparalleled Software. I did it with my tutor at the time. He was a programmer and he knew a lot more than I did. And so we built two top one selling medical and productivity apps on the Mac App Store when those launched. One was just a pill reminder. It helped you remember to take your pills. The other one was called Do It. It kind of like stopped your screen and said like, you have to go do this thing. So it would be kind of like a Pomodoro clock, kind of before those became really popular on the iOS devices and Mac devices. And again, just like right time, right place. Like we were just early into these platforms, and it was really easy to get a lot of traction. And I think that's a general lesson for consumers: just like get early onto platforms. I think it's pretty difficult to get any amount of attention when you're in a very saturated market. And then from there, went finished out high school, ended up not going to college. Joined a tech company in Santa Barbara as like their one of their first hires in user experience on their mobile and desktop side. I was the only user experience researcher on the mobile and desktop side, and then they had another small team that they hired at the same time for web. And I was 19 years old and I got a pretty good job, and I was like, oh, I probably don't need to get a job right now. I could probably figure this out a little bit later. So I left that job and then I started a venture back company, which later became WeDo. And WeDo was my first venture back company. We raised about 2.5 rounds, scaled that as a like personal wellness productivity app to about 1.5 million users. And then we kind of shut that down in 2018. So that was like that's kind of then that takes me to kind of where we're at now. But that was kind of my trajectory from like early adolescence all the way to about 20.
So you never went to college in the end.
Never went to college. Yeah, I did college while I was in high school. We had like a program that you could do like dual enrollment between our city college. I went to grew up in Santa Barbara, so we had one of the top city colleges. I think it is the number one city college in America. But it is an incredible city college. So we had dual enrollment, so you can take city college classes while going to high school. So I did take some college classes, um, and I think I would have qualified for an AA degree. But I ended up not kind of following through or doing anything past like a few classes.
And when you were doing all of those things, how did your parents react to it? Were they just fine with it, or were there some discussions?
My dad doesn't like admitting this. I think everyone likes taking credit for things when things end up well. Like, oh, I always knew you were gonna be fine. My dad was not okay with it. He was pretty pissed when I was not willing to go to college. He was like, "Well, you need to do something. We either get a job or join a program, but I'm not letting you just drop out of college and move back." So that's what I did. I joined a program called Uncollege, which I think is still around. This was started by Dale Stevens, and he was a Thiel Fellow. So it was like a sister program to like this Thiel Fellowship that was out. I had never heard of the Thiel Fellowship. My dad sent me this Uncollege thing, and I was like, oh, okay, like that sounds like something. It was in San Francisco, and that was pretty cool. So as long as I had a trajectory, as long as there was something for me to go and do, my dad was okay with the idea of me not going to college. My mom was a little bit more scared. She was like, "What are you going to put on your resume? How are people going to hire you?" She didn't. My dad's always been an entrepreneur. My dad he started as a photographer, owning his own little photo studio, and then he's now owns a travel agency for the last like 20 plus years. So you know, my dad's always been an entrepreneur. He understands that bug, that itch of like wanting to start and do your own thing. but my mom doesn't. So she was more concerned about my well-being and my health. My dad was more financially concerned with me, for me. Like, what are you going to do for a living? Like, how everyone needs a degree. Um, so it was definitely a lot more tough for my dad, I think, in that way.
And did you kind of take it as a red flag, or you were kind of convinced that, you know what, I'll figure it out?
I think at the time it was so funny. This was the best reference point I had to people dropping out of college was still like Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or something like that. Like this was 2013, 2014-ish era, like circa. And so it was not cool or interesting to drop out of college. It was still kind of a stupid thing to do. Um, and so it was a little bit more accepted because if you were in the tech world, it was kind of cool in the tech world to drop out of college. But it was still like when I told my friends, they were just like, you actually did it? Like that's you don't do it. Like maybe you go to Stanford and you drop out, but you don't not go to Harvard or Stanford and drop out. Like just not going to college was a very different thing than dropping out from a prestigious college. Um, and like that was kind of I didn't really think about that. I'm like, I don't have Stanford on my resume. I don't have Harvard on my resume. Like I didn't go to a prestigious college and then drop out and say, well, look, like I went to this cool place. So it was kind of scary. I didn't have any the tech world as much as they don't care about a college degree, they do love if you went to a great college. So that was a little bit scary.
And there is a hypocrisy there, kind of.
Yeah, it's unspoken. Obviously, if you get a degree, it is spoken. But if you don't get a degree, they still want to know, like, what school did you drop out of? Where did you come from? And I think that slowly started to fade. So I think like now people are just not going to college at all, or they'll go to a trade school, they'll go to a boot camp, or they'll go to some type of trade inside of the tech world, and that's enough. Like you don't have to get a 4-year degree. So I think it now, if I were to do it, I don't think it would have been. I don't think it's an interesting story. But back then, it definitely was. It was scary. It really was.
And you mentioned that right after that, you went on to actually build a venture-backed company.
Yeah, I so kind of all these stories kind of connect together. So I went to that city college. A lot of people. Um, I've had this happen a lot in my life where people say, "Oh, you must have been connected to someone. You must have known someone. That's how you got to where you are." Uh, there was some conspiracy about like anyone who gets any level of success is like, well, I don't have your network. Well, I don't have your connections. I did a pitch at our Santa Barbara City College to a group of 3 judges about my business idea, and I won. I won our pitch. This was I think it was a $50 class. I mean, it's city college credit, so it's like super cheap to get any class there. I did it with one of my good friends who I'm still friends with. I was his best man at his wedding recently, and I won the pitch. And so one of the judges from that pitch competition, she was like, "You should meet some angel investors in Santa Barbara." And I was like, "What's an angel investor?" And so like I didn't really get the whole game. And she was like, I want to refine your pitch with you. I want to make sure this is good before you meet this guy. And his name was John Patoti. And so John Patoti kind of ran the Santa Barbara Angel Alliance, I think is what it was called. And I think it still runs. And so she had an introduction and a connection to John Patoti, and she wanted me to refine my pitch and get it good. And at some point, I told her, I'm like, I think I'm ready. Like, I think we just can stop like practicing this pitch. And she made an introduction to John Patoti. John Patoti was kind of my connection to the startup world. I mean, he really got me introduced to all these other angels who had companies, who did successful things. And I remember my favorite story from meeting John Patoti is I met him 2 or 3 times. I didn't know how to ask for money. I didn't know what that process was. Like why in someone's mind would they give you $100,000 because you had a good conversation with them? Like that didn't make sense to me. Like that wasn't that didn't feel real. So I kept talking to him and he was like, really excited about what I was doing. He totally got the business. He wanted to introduce me to some people. And by the third time of meeting him, he said, "Are you going to ask for money?" And I didn't know what to do. I was just like, I mean, yeah, I would if you could. And he was like, you got to ask for money. Um, and that was a huge lesson for me. Ever since then, I every single first pitch I have, I always ask for money directly on the end of that pitch, and it served me well. But that was yeah, that was kind of the start of my entrepreneur experience. And I was 19 years old when I raised that first round. I think we raised just under $1 million, and then we had a few venture funds in that, and then we raised another round like 2 or 3 years later.
So how did that process look like for you, like in your head? Like you went from this not making sense at all to actually raising funds. Were you like freaking out all the time? Like what is happening, bro?
I definitely take a different approach. I think I've never really had imposter syndrome. I think we all don't know what we're doing, and at a really young age, I remember I had ODD. I was diagnosed with like ODD, which is a defiance disorder, which I guess you can put a name to it. I had a authority problem with my teachers, and the realization, I don't think it was a diagnosable issue, but I think the realization I came to was, oh, adults are just big kids. And what that realization gave to me when I was, I don't know, 7 years old, 8 years old, I think around that time, was I don't have to respect them if they don't respect me. And they also don't know what they're doing. And I gained a lot of empathy from my parents as I grew up and when I was in my teenage, because I realized that they were figuring this out too. They had no idea what they were doing. I was their first boy teenager. They had never done that before. They didn't know what they were doing. They weren't professionals. They didn't go to school to be parents. And similarly, a lot of what we do in a startup, you don't go to school for. You don't know what to do. And so when I was starting my company, there was moments of, oh crap, I should know what to do. But you really don't. And every single generation of startups, whether it's Web 1.0, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, and these little in betweens of smartphones and apps and stuff like that, the landscape completely changes. I mean, one of my investors who sold $1 billion company in the 2000s, when I started my app company for the iPhone, he said, "Well, can you bundle it with CDs?" And I was like, That doesn't exist anymore." I'd love to do that, but that doesn't exist anymore. And so many of these entrepreneurs, you have to realize that every single time you start a company in a different era of the startup land, it's a completely different thing. Now, there are some salient stuff. Steve Blank talks a lot about, how to start a company, how to do user research, how to talk to customers, how to build a business. And those things generally are true in most industries. But the vast majority of starting a company is new. It's different every single time. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence to be like, you have to figure this out for yourself. And I learned a lot by asking people, you know, you I don't there's no way of copying success. Like there's a there's like a theory of life, and then there's like exploration and exploitation. But basically, like the math formula says is, if there is anything to be exploited, it will be. And so you first have to explore, and then you exploit, and then you explore, and then you exploit. And the ebbs and flows of kind of discovery, whether it's product discovery or business model, whatever it might be. And what you learn from that model of exploitation and exploration is you cannot repeat success. If a business has been successful through a specific medium, through a specific avenue, like let's say, they got featured by Apple, or uh, you know, they got some promotion by some company, or they did some free whatever, that has already been exploited. There is no more gains to be had in there. And what you have to do is figure out a new place to get some visibility, some whatever you need. And so that concept of exploitation means it's always new. It's always different. To do anything substantially new to substantially different, you have to figure out way of distribution, a new way of building product, a new way of thinking. And by definition, it's new. You don't know how to do that. And so that idea kind of always followed me along throughout my journeys. And I definitely learned that, like I said, is uh, there's no way of being an imposter because there's no one else like you in that way. There's no one else who could do what you're doing. We're all figuring it out at the same time. I usually tell my partners whenever they're like, "Oh, did you see that? Did you see that? What's happening in this movie?" And I'm like, "We're watching the same movie here. Like, I don't know. I don't know what happens." And I think that that type of mentality gives you a lot of confidence for sure.
So you mentioned that the first product had around 1.5 million users,
Yeah.
and the product you're building right now has a lot to do with building such companies over and over again. If a company is trying to use your product, that's what you're trying to enable founders to do. Could you share how you think about building a product from like scratch? In a sense, are you always looking for problems to solve, or it's just something that is just obvious to you and you just kind of go out there and do it?
Yeah, I do think as much as YC propagates the idea of, don't build a solution searching for a problem, I think it's really hard for people to realize what that means. It is so fun to fall in love with ideas and to fall in love with things that we love. And the reality is a lot of the things that we love are not good venture backable businesses. It doesn't mean it can't be a business. It doesn't mean it can't make some money, but there's a difference between a business and a venture backable business, a business that could turn into 100 plus million dollars in ARR. So when we originally had 4 or 5 ideas that we were playing around with. So the way this company started was me and one of my co-founders in my last company, Adam. We'd always wanted to start another company together, and we really loved working with each other, which not a lot of previous co-founders can say. We really enjoyed this process of building companies together, and I went to him and I said, "Hey, Adam, uh, I want to do something, but I don't know what I want to do." And he was kind of in the same camp. He's like, "I want to do something, but I don't really know what I want to do." And he was still at another company at the time, and so I was like, well, let me play around with some ideas. Let me kind of do some validation. Let me see what's out there. And I'll come back to you and I'll pitch you some ideas, basically. And I would always tease some ideas or whatever. And he'd be like, no, I don't like that idea. Oh, that one's actually kind of, oh, no, I don't like that one. So we kind of go back and forth about ideas that we could fall in love with ourselves. Because at the end of the day, even though I say, you don't want to build a solution searching for a problem, you don't want to work on a problem that you could see yourself working on for years. And there's a lot of great problems to solve in the world, but the ebbs and flows of startups means that you really have to fall in love with that problem as well as the problem has to be real. So our first filter was, is this a real problem? And then our second filter was, did we love this? Could we see ourselves doing this for years and years and years to come? So we played around with some products in the wellness and coaching space. We played in some products in the VC and startup space. And then we started talking to product managers together. And we were talking to them about, what are your biggest problems? And my background was product. I mean, I was formerly head of product and VP of product as consulting for a bunch of YC Series A companies, helping them build out their product teams. And with COVID, all these product teams moved to remote. So doing creative work remotely was really difficult, really interesting. And then the biggest change was all these companies now leaned on product organizations to improve their retention and improve their conversion and expansion with their existing customers. Because what happens during COVID, what happens during a recession is you no longer look at your new business as the way that you're going to grow your revenue. You're looking at your existing business as a way of keeping and growing your revenue. And guess what? The product people are the people who are managing those decisions. So we learned a lot when we were talking to these product managers, and they were basically saying, oh, this is bad. Like, we don't have any tools for us. And they had the road mapping tools, they had the strategy tools, but they didn't have any product process, product operations tools. And so this was becoming a bigger and bigger problem for them. And when we looked at the market, we saw a lot of different things with how pricing was being done in this market. We saw some interesting things with the lack of automation in this market. And so we did the Steve Blank thing. We went to them and we said, "Hey, have you built solutions to try and solve this problem?" And they pulled up their spreadsheet. And one of my investors, he always said, anytime you see a spreadsheet, there's $1 billion opportunity there. And so, we waited to see someone pull up a spreadsheet, and they're like, "I love this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet's amazing. This thing runs my whole company." And we're like, "Oh, that's a problem." I mean, anytime someone is like kind of makeshift solutions, especially if they're spending money on these makeshift solutions, and I'm like, well, spreadsheets aren't meant for product operations. And we talked to every other team, and they were like, "Yeah, we have problems with product. They don't do this, they don't do that, they don't do this." So this idea was coming together and it was forming and it was really interesting. And we followed the process. And I mean, this is a very basic process. It's not particularly a fun process. And then we said, okay, cool. We're going to send you an LOI, like a letter of intent, letter of interest. And we're going to guarantee that if we built this product, you would pay for it. And almost 100% of the people that we interviewed said, yeah, I'd pay for this product tomorrow. And that was a huge sign for us. All the other products we played around with, they're like, yeah, this is cool. Yeah, this is interesting. I'll be on your beta list. Yes, let me know when this is out. But then with this product, they were like, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? And we're like, oh, okay. This is pull from the market. So yeah, it was a very easy idea for us to really get started on, because we fell in love with it and our customers fell in love with it, and they were willing to pay for it. And what more could you ask for?
And when you are having this initial conversations, right, there is just a lot of, I would say, flow of information just coming towards you. Like, if you talk to like 50 people, then 50 people are going to have a lot of different ideas as to what is happening and what is not working. So could you maybe share, like, your product kind of helps exactly with that problem, but like when you were doing it for this product, how were you managing, how did you, like, go through that? Like, how did you, like, pick out exactly the right number of insights to kind of build it from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, because I think we build tools for product operations, product managers. We help automate a lot of that process. One of the first places where a lot of product operations starts is your user research, your qualitative data. And when we were building out our own product and we were talking to our own customers, we were dog fooding the whole thing. I mean, this was, any problem we ran into, we were trying to solve ourselves. And we would always tell investors, we were like, if we fail at building this company, we failed at building the product for this company. Because we have to, if for us to succeed, we also have to succeed building the product. And we also know the product's working when we have business success, because we're clearly using our product to validate and do the things that we need to do. So yeah, we started in spreadsheets. That was the place for us to start. And then one of the interesting things is when you talk to customers, is you realize what is real and what they think is real. And so oftentimes, if a customer is saying, I really think that this type of solution, or I use this, or I do this, this, and this, and I'll ask them, when was the last time you did that? And they'd be, well, I actually haven't done it in a while. I'm like, okay, so this person doesn't actually do that. People love like self-grandizing themselves as a perfect person in their job and their role. Like, oh, we have a very clean product process. Every week we do this, this, and this. We do stand-ups. We have product strategy meetings. Our backlog is completely clear by the end of the week. And I'm like, can you pull up your backlog really quick? And they, oh, well, I mean, we haven't really done it the last 3 weeks, but I swear we do it every other week. So it's like, it's really diving into them. I mean, Steve Blank talks about just follow your customer around for a day. You'll really see what they do and where they spend their time. And we do that. I mean, I would on an interview with a customer, they would say, yeah, we spend a lot of time on our PRDs or product requirements docs. We really make sure things are understood. I'm like, can you pull up a product requirements docs right now? And they would be like, oh, I mean, let me see if I can find a good one. And they pull one up, and I look at it, and they'd be like, so this part should have been filled out, but we're still waiting for a decision over here, and this other thing, like, we can't find the data for this, but I swear, like, most of the time this is pretty good. And you start falling into these patterns with customers where you really have to challenge them. And I would tell customers, like, I would fire customers very often in our beta process. Either the problem wasn't big enough for them, they didn't care about it, or the solution or whatever it was just wasn't right for them. And I was like, it's okay. Come back to us when this is a hair and fire problem for you. And they did. They would come back. We have customers who've signed up for a product last year who are now coming back to us and being like, "You're right. I should have signed up for this tool. I didn't have a process for this. Let's get our calls recorded. Let's get our research into one product." And so, we don't care to, get every single customer onto our product. We're really still every day we always look for the customers who are suffering from this problem. And if you don't have enough customers who are suffering from the problem, then it probably isn't worth building. And suffering really means that they're reaching out to you constantly at what's the update? What's the update? What's the update? Where is it at? Where is it at? Where is it at? And a year later, since launching our product, we still have customers reaching out to us asking for things from us. And a huge thing that I think a lot of people don't, a lot of people kind of intuitively know when they see it is product market fit. Oftentimes, we had an investor, and I'd always ask him, "What is product market fit?" And this is mostly for B2B. He said, "When your service goes down at 2 a.m. and people start calling." And I think that is the level of demand you want from customers. It's not your service goes down at a very reasonable hour, like 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and people are annoyed. It's when people are using it at odd hours of the night because they have to use it, because they're working their butts off and they need to use it. It is essential to their business. And those types of things are very rare. Those types of services very rarely exist. And our product hit that milestone, pretty early on, where customers, if our service went down or something was wrong, they're like, "I have a call I need to record right now," and then they come back the next day and they'd be like, "Where's my research? Where did this go? How did this go?" So if our service wasn't perfect, if it didn't work phenomenally well, they were very frustrated. And even today, when they ask for features, they're always following up: "Is it done? Is it done? Is it done?" Because they use the product every day. It's essential to their business. And I think those are the only problems we're solving. Is it essential to their business? Is this essential to the success of their business? And these are questions you really have to ask in a downturn like today. If if a if a company is going to start systematically shutting off the services at their company, where does yours fall? When do they shut off their service? And you want to be one of the last ones. And usually the last ones are infrastructure, or payment processing, things that allow their business to exist. You want to get as close to that as you possibly can. We're probably somewhere in the middle. We're probably like the last third of the services that they might shut off. Um, but we want to get to that. Like, you cannot start or you cannot shut down a company without thinking about Build Better.
Hmm. Since you mentioned service uptime and infrastructure, could you could you share a little bit as to, so I have always thought when your product is growing in the early days, how does the engineering look like, in the sense, like, building a product for 10 people is very different than building it for, let's say, 10,000. And in the early days, right, when you're just getting started, how does it look like from an engineering standpoint? Like, how are the costing decisions made? How are the cloud resources deployed? Or how are the architecture decisions made? Could you share some light in that regard?
The biggest thing, this is more true in consumer, very true in business even today, as we move from people expecting enterprise moving down to SMB type products, where enterprise is quite ugly products. They work from a functionality standpoint. They don't have any aesthetic appeal to them. They don't feel particularly great. They're quite ugly often. And those tools have kind of come down market to SMB. And now consumer is kind of going up market, where people are now known as prosumer. Now there's companies who are building products from the consumer landscape of really pretty, really functional, really um, visually appealing and easy to use, is now getting pushed up into SMBs and then getting pushed up into enterprise. And it hasn't quite hit the enterprise market. If you look at enterprise, it's just function over form still. But we are slowly starting to see people say, if I have to use this for work, I want it to do a good job, and then I want it to look well, and I want it to be a great product. Um, and I think we're really starting to see that push into prosumer. And I think what that means is nobody likes burnt pizza, and this is a common UX thing. There's other ways of saying it. There's the UX paper cuts that people run into, but the nobody likes burnt pizza is there's no point in validating that somebody doesn't like burnt pizza. We know that to be true. If you make a bad pizza, no one's going to eat it. You're never trying to validate if people like or don't like bad products. I'll tell you that right now. People do not like bad products. What you're trying to validate is whatever, let's say, a topping that you're trying to have on the pizza. Do people like pineapple on their pizza? Do people like chicken on their pizza? Do people like, bacon on their pizza? Whatever that might be, that's what you're trying to validate. It's not do people like pizza even, it's what do they like on their pizza. So you have to start from a place that people recognize, that people understand and they feel comfortable. What that means is, the while the cost of building software goes down, the experience people expect from that software goes up. And so the cost kind of stays the same. Because while it's cheaper to run a service than it's ever done, the amount of time and energy and work it takes to build those services continue to climb. And this is a really difficult thing for people to understand, where there was a time where there was kind of this like golden age of software where you could kind of build these simple tools that solve simple problems, and that was enough. You didn't really need to think much more than that. And now the infrastructure is there. We have the AWSs, we have the Figmas, we have the frameworks and the libraries and the infrastructure to scale a tool to 1 million customers. That's not enough. You have to build a product that people love, that is well designed, that works into their workflow, that has the experience that they come to expect from products in their life. And what that means is that even your first version of your product has to look and feel pretty good. It doesn't mean it has to be beautiful. It doesn't mean it has to be amazing. It just has to do something special. And that bar for special continues to climb. So, when we first built our product, we were again, there's two types of products. It's kind of the pendulum of products is you're trying to validate something and then you're trying to build something. Validate something and build something. So our first product was just trying to validate the idea. Would anyone sign up for this tool? Would anyone use it? Would anyone actually pay for it? Would anyone um, use it on a regular basis? What were they actually looking to do with our tool? So we had these hypotheses we were trying to validate on our first version of our product, and it was first version of our product had a lot of bugs, but it looked really good. But it was hard. We had logout issues. Customers would get logged out every 24 hours. There was like issues with inviting people. There were shareability issues. But what was interesting was there was a lot of features in our product no one even clicked on. We would get requests. They're like, oh, when I do user research, I really want to have a guide. I want to have a template to follow. And we're like, that's a great idea. I can totally see myself using that. I love that. We built that. Zero. No one used it. No one liked it. It didn't. And there were some issues with it, but even the customers who were willing to struggle and figure it out still complained about it. Not from a functionality standpoint, from foundational standpoint. I don't think this is the type of guides that I'm looking for. And so we took out guides and we got zero complaints. No one complained about taking out these features. So what we did was we would always try and launch with a minimum amount of features that we felt like customers would love. And then when we launched it, we would start taking out features. And a lot of times what early stage companies where they often fail is they continue to add new features. They're like, oh, well, there's 10 people using this thing. Let's just add one more thing. Let's add one more thing. You are a small team. You cannot support that many features as an organization. Your customers also do not want to be confused by the amount of complexity that your product is slowly building. And your infrastructure cannot handle the amount of complexity that you're starting to build into your tool. And so we very early on, we would always go back into our product and we say, what can we take out this month? What is nobody using? And I can tell you this very confidently. We take out more features than we add every year. Our goal is hopefully we just have one feature, but we know we're never going to get there. But we are trying our best to reduce the amount of friction, the amount of buttons, the amount of clicking, the amount of experiences and things that people can run into and not have a predictable outcome. And so for example, guides, let's take that feature, for example. We took that out. We got no complaints. We had some people continue to request a thing that sounds like guides, but what they really want is maybe something more hand holding on a call. And so, we're looking at the data and we say, okay, well, we launched this feature, no one's using it. And particularly, we'll launch a feature and we go back to the customers who requested it with our own tool. We have a way of like sorting for the features that people request, and then we just email them and we say, hey, we launched this feature that you requested, and they don't use it. And then we'll email them again. Why don't you use it? You're in our product every day. Why haven't you used this feature? Sometimes it's a reasonable thing. Sometimes it's, well, I only do that once a month. And we're like, okay, we'll wait till the end of the month. Sometimes it's not a reasonable thing, and they're like, eh, I don't really want it. I can't really see myself using it. It's not right yet. And I'm like, you haven't even clicked on the button. I can see your
Yeah.
session. You have not even clicked on the button. We track all of our events in Mixpanel. And so we'll look at our customers' behavior and we say, well, that's not matching up with reality. And so, you know, when I open up a product, I want it to be so clear about what is the one job that this product is trying to solve for me. And I want that job and I want that workflow to be very clear through its process. When you have a million bells and whistles, it's very hard to communicate to your customers about what your value to your product is. And it turns into, and everything like a Swiss Army knife. Like, well, you can do this and you can do this and you can do this and you can do this. And to answer your question, very early on, you need to be as explicitly clear to your customers, your investors, and your team members about what problem you're trying to solve. What does the experience of that problem or solution look like? And how are we going to get there in very tactical, tangible steps? And so we would always kind of come through this cycle all the time, and we pivoted. We pivoted 3 or 4 times in that first year, from more scheduling user research calls, and we realized while that was a hair on fire problem, it was a very infrequent problem for teams. And Sam Altman has it can't just be a hair on fire problem; it also has to be a frequent problem in their workflow. And so it was not as frequent as we would like, and so we just started chugging through their workflow. We have a very secretive doc at our company, which is every single interaction a product manager does, every single thing, every click that they have. It is so long, I cannot even begin to tell you, but it is every single action a product person does, a product operations person also does inside of their organization. And every single time we think of a feature, we go to that doc and we're like, where does this fit? How does this go into our workflow for our product and our customers? Um, and I think when we go through that, we also take things out. We're like, well, where did we get this wrong? Where we thought this fit over here, we thought they do this all the time, and then we build this feature and they never use our feature. So is it because of our solution? Is it because of their workflow? Did we mess up on this chart? Is there something here we're missing? And sometimes there is, and sometimes it's like we built the wrong solution, and sometimes it's we don't have the right map of their behavior, and sometimes we didn't spec it out right. There's a million reasons why you can be wrong, but you're always trying to go back to these documents and say, where did we go wrong? We were smart, competent people. We made a rational, smart decision. Why did this not work? Where did we mess up? Um, and that's always been an interesting part of the process.
Listening to you kind of gives me a sense that, like the ideas you're presenting are very crystal clear. Like you know what you're doing, but that's you. Okay. So I'm wondering, how do you translate the clarity, for example, that you have into a team? Because essentially, right, the team is the one who will actually build the product. Like the majority of the work will be done by the team. So how do you think for you and your team, right, that translation works? Is it the process that you guys have, or the culture that you put into place since day one? or you just hire extremely smart people, or it's a combination of all of them and some more?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to hire extremely smart people. I think um, smart people are also very skeptical. They often don't. They often are challenging, particularly product people. Engineers historically struggle with product people, and product people historically struggle with engineers. And there's a great reason why is like, product people often live very close to the customer if they're doing their job well. They also have a different sense of urgency. Like they want to maybe get things out quicker, where engineers might, if they care, engineers want to get things out right and do things right and scalable. And so there's always this like tug and pull where even if an engineer emotionally agrees with the decision being made, then there's the bargaining of what can we kind of, how can we get this out, how can we actually do this in the way that we want. And that bargaining can, and that's if the engineer and the product people are good. If one of those two people are not particularly good at their job, oh my god, does that fighting never end? Because then the product person might not care, or they might not do the research, they might have their ego involved, they might be making decisions based off of what they want, not necessarily what the customer wants. The engineer, if they're not particularly great, they might be lazy, or they just don't want to do, they want to do the minimum amount of work to get something out there. They don't want to listen to the customer, they just want to build. And so there's, or they just don't want to build. So there's a lot of this like in perfect world kind of scenario where you have a great talented product manager, you have a very talented engineer. How do you communicate kind of what your vision is? How do you communicate kind of what you need to get done? I think a lot of it is, this was kind of the foundation of our tool was, you have to show them what the customer is saying. You have to have them listen to it. It is one thing when a product manager says, trust me, this is important. And it's another when a product manager says, listen to this. And when you go to that listen to this moment where you're able to pull up that customer's voice, show it to an engineer, and in 20 seconds, you're listening to this product manager, you're listening to the customer say, this is the most serious problem in our organization. Our business is going to fail if we cannot get a solution to this problem, whatever it might be. And the engineer, they take note of that. It is hard to argue with a customer. It is a hard thing to argue with listening to the severity of a problem. Now, where you can make a mistake there is you shouldn't just build what customers tell you to build. You have to understand what the problem is, and you have to think about a solution based off of those problems. And that's where that engineering product relationship should really be formed. It's about talking to an engineer, about talking to your designer, about talking to your team and saying, here's the problem at hand. Problem led development is kind of what we call it. Here's a problem at hand. Now let us work together to think about a solution. And so to answer your question, so often I do have a 26-page document about our next 6 months, what I think that's going to look like. I'll make sure people read that. I'll go over that. There's a lot of clarity. Jeff Bezos talks about there's a lot of clarity in writing and getting things written down. It's hard to be unclear when you've written something for so long. And I do think there's some truth to that. Now, my 6-pager turned into a 26-pager. I might have been the first person to maybe challenge that argument that there's more clarity in more words. There might be actually less clarity when you write that much. But I do think it was a very helpful process. I sent that to our investors. I also do weekly investor and team updates. So every single Monday or Tuesday, there is an email in your inbox to our investors and to our team members about what got done, what our vision looks like, what's changed, customer insights, things that I'm chewing on, things I'm thinking about, ways we're thinking about these problems. And the point is you want to bring everyone along with you on this journey. A lot of founders, they think of like popping their head out every now and then. They're like, oh, I'm going to tell you a really good insight now. Or, they think about kind of coming to these insights every now and then. I think Marty Kagan talks about the repetition of product, the repetition of communicating your vision, the jobs to be done, the problems you're trying to solve. And I embody that as much as I can. I mean, I am every single conversation, you're probably going to hear me talk about the problem, talk about our solution, talk about our differentiation, talk about what we're trying to accomplish in the next 6 months. Every single conversation, we can be talking about the most random thing in the world. I will find a moment in that conversation to bring up our vision, our problem, our solution, why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing it. And I'm constantly just beating that drum as repeatedly as possible. Where they're hearing from me what the vision is. And then most importantly, I'll go back to them and I ask them, usually around once a month, I'll ask everyone in our one-on-ones, what are we doing here? Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? And I hear what they say. And the first few times I did this, boy, were we misaligned. I mean, they were like, we're trying to build this, this, and this. I'm like, no, like that is not what we're trying to do here. And then, over time, I wouldn't correct them. I wouldn't snap at them and be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I wouldn't go crazy, but I would ask them more questions. Well, why do you think we're building this thing? Why do you think our customers are asking for this? Can you listen to this conversation and tell me what you learned or took away from it? I'd help them. Like, I'm not, if they're giving me the wrong answer, then I haven't brought them along with the journey well enough. I haven't brought them along with the story that well enough. And that's on me. So oftentimes, to answer your question, how do we communicate our vision? How do we keep clarity amongst our vision? How do we make sure everyone on our team understands what we're doing and why we're doing it? It is repetition, 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 but there's a lot of ways of getting them curious, involving them in the process. That is really the biggest thing that people mess up on. A lot of people look at visionary CEOs and they don't want to share their secrets. They don't want to share their insights. I will send a website of a competitor to our team and say, look how good this copy is. Look how good this asset is. I'm not then hiding that to myself and saying, I came up with this really brilliant idea for new copy. Look at me. Look how smart I am. Look how visionary I am. That's not me. Like, I am sending the story that I am learning along with you. I have a whole Notion document of all the learnings and lessons that I take from the things that I'm reading, like the books, the podcasts that I listen to, any lessons and learnings that I get. I want you to understand, where did I get that from? And instead of building a lack of, oh, Spencer doesn't have any original thoughts, instead it says, Spencer is willing to share his story and narrative. Spencer is willing to express where he gets his information, what he's learned, what he gets from his customers. And I think that is worth its weight in gold. I mean, people want to understand why. Smart people want to understand why. They don't care that you abbreviated something from 70 years ago that somebody said. They care about, well, what were they trying to say and what are we trying to say now from that? Most famous quotes that you can attribute to famous people today are versioned of old quotes that someone else came up with, quite a while ago. A lot of these concepts are quite old concepts. It's about turning it into something new and turning it into something relevant. That is often the difficult thing or the new thing. So that's where, I'll spend my time is like, how do I update this analogy? How do I update this way of thinking to something new and modern in a way that people can connect to and resonate with? But I don't mind sharing my source material. I don't mind citing my sources for any of that. And I think the more you can show people the man behind the curtains, the Wizard of Oz, the person behind the magic, I think internally, I think there's something beautiful there. Now, to our customers, I want them to think we're magical people, but to our team members, I think they need to see the magic. They need to see how the trick is done.
Yeah. You mentioned that you send a weekly email to investors. Could you uh, kind of describe how you see a founder's relationship with the investors?
Yeah, I think I saw a tweet the other day about this founder charging, I think, $300 to meet with him for his Series B. I think that stuff's kind of gross. I think you should treat people the way you want to be treated. There's ebbs and flows of investors being the scarce resource, and then there are ebbs and flows of founders being the scarce resource. And you should never take advantage of either one of those two opportunities. I think you should treat people with respect, and I think you should treat people the way you want to be treated. How would you feel if investors started charging founders to start meeting them? And there are a lot of predatory organizations that do this. There are some accelerators and some startup networks that will say like, oh, if you want to pitch at our thing, it costs $50 or $100. And I think that's pretty gross. I think you're really harping on, founders who don't really are new to the space, who are just getting into it. And often those types of presentations are not very fruitful for the founders as well, and that's their first experience. I mean, that was the first way of them getting into it. I think, any gatekeeping that is being done in any industry, I think is usually wrong. I can't think of an experience where gatekeeping could be beneficial or helpful. But I'm sure there's probably some example that maybe I'm missing. I think the way in which that I treat investors, when I started my this company, Build Better, we uh, had an idea. We had talked to some customers. I called up one of my investors. I actually texted him from my last company. And my last company, my investors did not make their money back. I mean, this was not a great exit for them. And so I was worried. I was worried, are they going to give me money again? Have I made a mistake? And we had an acquisition offer on the table, and I ended up turning it down because it wasn't going to be super fruitful. And so I was like, yeah, like I don't know, like are they going to judge me for my decisions that I made? And I he calls me a week later after I texted him. I thought he was basically ghosting me, and he's like, "What are you working on?" And I told him what I was working on, and then he said, "Well, how much do you need?" I'm like, "Well, we're just raising $120,000. We just want to build a proof of concept." He's like, "Okay, send me the wire information." I'm like, "Well, how much are you investing?" He's like, "Well, you just need $120,000. I'll send you the $120,000." And I mean, it was that easy. I mean, these investors, when they respect your decisions and they respect the process and you treat them with respect, I think there's a tremendous amount of gratitude that they pay you back. Almost all of our investors from my last company invested in me again. And I think that's because of the relationship I built with them and because of I take this seriously. This is not my money. This is their money. They're giving me because they want an outsized return. It's not They didn't give it to me because they want a 2x. They didn't give it to me because they want a 5x. They gave or angel investors, they want 1,000x. They want 100x. I mean, they want a massive return. And it's my responsibility to do everything in my power to give them their money back and then a lot more. And I think a lot of people don't honor that respect. Is they have endowed with you a ton of trust, and you need to treat that with respect. And so when I meet a lot of founders who are doing silly things with their money, or they're growing too fast, or they're scaling too fast, or they're I can't even think. I mean, they're doing things like charging investors an opportunity to talk to them. It's that is the telltale sign for me that like things are not working well between that relationship. People really need to look at investors as, you are giving me an opportunity. You are feeding me. You are putting food in my mouth, just like my customers are. And the relationship I have with investors and the relationship I have with customers are very similar, which is I respect your time, I respect your money, and I hope I can do everything I can to make it worth your time, money, and energy. And, when it comes to the investors that we pick, we want our investors and our customers to be very aligned about, we are focused on solving a real problem, and we're focusing on solving that problem well, of course, at a profit. But, when we work with our customers, we're very clear about what our pricing is. We're very clear about how much we value them. And I think when we talk about a weekly investor update, I care a lot about my investor updates. I used to write, last year I would do monthly investor updates, and my monthly investor updates were quite long. I shared a lot of detail. I was always very honest. I think if you start seeing investor updates with only good news, your founder is lying to you. So, I was always very honest with like, this is what's not working at our business right now. And here's what I'm afraid of. Even when things were going very well, when we were signing up hundreds and thousands of customers, we have 14,000 teams using our product today. We're the number one product research tool in the market. And even throughout that success, I would go to our investors and I'd say, our retention isn't what I'd like it to be. Our conversion isn't what it should be. We are growing really. I don't know who these customers are. They're not our ideal fit customers. So I would go to our investors and I'd be very clear with them. Here's what's not good with our metrics. Here's what's not working. And here's what we're trying to here's what we're doing to figure that out. Here's what we're going to do to solve this problem. And we worked with our investors on a lot of, I have a very close relationship with our investors where I'll call them up, I'll text them, and I'll be like, what should I do? I don't know what to do here. And when you build a relationship of lies where there's only good news, they get surprised when there's something bad that happens. When you build a relationship with honest and real news, they don't get surprised anymore. And what I realized was my investor updates, my monthly long ones, they were taking a lot of time for me to write because I was sending them to both existing investors and potential new investors. And so there's 120 people on our investor list, and that was way too many people. There was way too many cooks in the kitchen where I was trying to like cater to too many people. So I shut that off. I was like, I'm not going to do monthly investor updates anymore. And I moved to weekly investor updates. And it only goes out to people who have given us money. And those updates are very raw. They're very honest. They have our metrics and analytics from the last week. You have to take it with a grain of salt because, we are not a weekly focused business. We're more of a monthly or quarterly focused business as far as our metrics. So I try and educate both our team members and our investors about what that looks like. We have some weeks where we grow 30%. We have some weeks where we grow 5%. But either way, we're always um, communicating what changed, communicating what's affected our business, and communicating what we're going to be doing. Um, I don't know. I love our investors and I love the people I get to work with every day. And I think founders who do not respect that relationship and do not look up to their investors and do not find investors who they feel like they can learn something from, um, I think it's just sad. I think it really is because investors, they made their money somehow. And the quicker you can realize that they made their money because they made smart decisions in their life, by and large, there are some people who are just lucky, and they can help you think and help you make decisions better. And they can help you. I'm a strong believer in you can't copy someone's success. I talked about that a little bit earlier, but you can avoid other people's failures. And when you talk to your investors, your job is to help them explain to you why are you going to fail. And almost on every single one of my conversations with investors, I do this at least quarterly, sometimes I do it every biweekly. um, I will ask them, if we're going to fail in a year, why do you think that is? And the responses are really interesting, and you'd be surprised, every investor is thinking about why you're gonna fail. And they're gonna try and help you if they can avoid it. But that's the elephant in the room. Every single time you talk to an investor is you have to understand where are they thinking? What are they thinking about? And the thing that I always come back to is, what do you know that I don't know? What are you seeing that I don't see? And I want you to tell me, why are we gonna fail? I might not agree with you. I might not do anything about it, but I need to hear it. Yeah. I really need to hear it, and I need you to be honest with me. And the investors that I end up picking as our investors, I often only pick investors often are surprised sometimes when I pick them as our investors because we often argue in our first investor meeting. They're like, I don't think this is. I think you're doing this. I think you should be doing that. Blah blah blah. And as long as they're respectful with their disagreement and they're honest and they're clear about their communication, I'm like, I want this guy or girl. Like, I want this person at my company, at my table, because they're willing to disagree with me in an articulate and helpful and productive way. And that is so hard to find. Finding sycophants or finding like easy investors who are just going to agree with everything. Oh, that sounds like a good idea, Spencer. Oh, yeah. Just got to do whatever you got to do. Oh, yeah, that sounds great. Like, that is not helpful. I don't need people agreeing with me. I tell myself that every day. Like, I don't want you to agree with me. I want you to disagree with me. And if you do agree with me, I need you to articulate why you agree with me. What about I'm saying is right or accurate? And so, these are often the conversations that I have with my investors. And I don't think a lot of founders do this. And I think it's a shame. It's a missed opportunity. Um, and I push investors to also do this with their team. I mean, we have one investor who was the very senior at Amazon, and he was in their product management department. And I mean, this guy disagrees with everything I say. I mean, this guy, I mean, it's so funny, and he'll challenge me. He'll be like, last time we talked, you said you were going to do this, and you ended up doing this. What am I missing? What? Why didn't you do the thing that you said you were going to do? And I love that. I mean, it puts a smile on my face. Um, and I think it's such an invaluable resource if you can find people who challenge you.
So, I'm listening to you speak, right? And the communication style you have, and I would say the sense of responsibility you have, not towards your team, but also investors. It now I'm thinking you started the first company when you were 19, right? And you were just learning as you were going. Do you think all the values that you talk about, you kind of maybe also got it from your parents, like from your mom and your dad?
I think we always are who we are because of our parents, whether it's the opposite of them or the same as them. We're always fighting our parents in that way. It's hard. It's hard to not be influenced by your parents because we're aware of them, and when you're aware of something, you're always going to make a decision about it. Do I want to be more like this, or do I want to be less like this? I think there's a lot of styles in my management where I have looked at some of the decisions my parents have made, and I say, "Oh, I don't want to do it like that. I want to do it differently. I want to do it better." And then there's a lot of things that my parents do really well. I mean, like, for start of this conversation, my for example, my mom, she was a professional organizer, and she loved having like systems and organization and processes. And I learned a lot about how do you document things, how do you think about things strategically, how do you build a system for things. My dad, on the other hand, had no system for anything. It was completely all over the place. He taught me how to throw spaghetti at the wall. How do I know nothing and still get something done? Um, and he was also a huge product fanatic. I mean, he loves great products. I got the Apple Watch Ultra the other day, and my dad's like, "Well, I can't have my son have a better watch than me," and so he gets the Apple Watch Ultra. Like that's just the relationship that we have, where we're always in competition with each other in a loving and compassionate way. So, but he cares. He doesn't just want the Apple Watch Ultra because I joke about him wanting it because I have the same one. He wants it because he understands the value of great products, and he wants great products, and he understands that I want great products too. And so if I have something, he's like, "Well, Spencer cares a lot about great products, so I must like this thing as well." And so I do think in that way, and what you're saying is I am who I am because of my parents, whether it is uh, a disagreement with my parents where I looked at their behavior and I said, I don't want to act like that. I don't want to behave like that. That is not who I am, and that's not how I want to show up and work. Or I look at them and I say, that's exactly how I want to show up, and I want to learn from you, and I need you to teach me how to show up in the way that you have because you figure something out that I haven't. Um, I think a lot of parents, we look at the people who birthed us as our parents. I think we have a lot of parents growing up. I had a tutor growing up who was very impactful in my life. I mean, he was a programmer. I spent a lot of my time in my teenage with him. I mean, he would take me to board game conventions because he loved board games. I love board games now. I had an earlier person who was really into World of Warcraft. I still play World of Warcraft because of that relationship. Um, and then, of course, the books. I mean, books really, I think for a lot of people, books are a teacher for them. And I would listen to a book and I'd fall in love with the person in that book. And when I read an autobiography and I read a biography or I read, I love nonfiction. Whenever I read something like Michael Porter, I'm like, I fall in love with those people. I'm like, this person is so smart. They're so thoughtful. They're so interesting, and I imagine a relationship with them where I want to think about, well, what can I learn from this person? What is this person trying to tell me in this book? How can I figure out and learn what they've learned and apply that to my life. So I think, between those three teachers, between my um, maternal, paternal people, and my coaches and my teachers in real life, and the books that I read, I think they all shaped me equally. And I think each time you read something, you have to be so careful, because you really do ask the question: am I like this, or am I not like this? Do I want to be more like this, or want to be less like this? Um, and I think those questions have really served me well.
Well, Spencer, this was nice. This was fun.
I appreciate it. I'm excited to see how stupid I sound in 10 years. I think that's always the mark. I think if you're not looking back and you're not saying, "Well, I shouldn't have not said that thing," not in a PC way, just always in a way of like developing your thoughts. It's just like, "Oh, I can't believe I thought like that." I think way differently now. Um, I think you're on the right track, but I'm always excited, and great questions yourself. I love these questions.
Yeah, yeah. No, I really enjoyed myself. How was it for you? Like, thinking everything on the spot, because I don't think we had any discussion as to what we're gonna talk about.
I think it's always good. I mean, I think it's so important to always be thinking about these questions. I think if you're asking questions that I have never thought about before, I think I'm in a bad spot. you know? Um so, they're all questions that I think we're always thinking a lot about, and we should always be caring about, and we should always be asking ourselves. Um so I love this. I love getting asked these questions where I'm able to articulate it and say it out loud for the first time. Um and it's fun.
And this was 1 hour, man. It was 1 hour 15 minutes. I did not realize, the time just passed by, man. It's very nice.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. I mean, I think it's my dad. This is one of the things I love taking from my dad is he was a phenomenal storyteller. Like, he loves stories, and he's so fun at telling stories. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I think there is a lot to be desired with just like make something worth listening to. Make something that people enjoy. There's a story, there's a thread, there's a narrative, and you tie it back to what you need to tie it back to. And I think you did a great job. I think you tied together a lot of themes and topics and things, and the story flows from one thing to another, where it wasn't necessarily, I have a set of 7 questions I want to ask you. It's like, here's a thread that we're pulling on. And while we're shifting the focus a little bit every time, we're still pulling that same thread, which I think you did a great job on.
Yeah. So I just tend to show up with a cup of coffee and really try to listen, you know, because a lot of times, for example, I've been talking to few guests, and right off, when we started, the guest was like, when I was in 10th grade, my dad passed away. And then he just said the whole thing in a very matter of fact way and just moved on. Okay. And then he went on for 20 minutes, which was not that incident. And for 20 minutes, I'm thinking, okay, I don't think it was just like a event. It's like a very major thing, but right. So I kind of asked him, like, would you be open to share what this was all about? Because if he did not want to share it, he would not say it at all, you know? Right. And then we spent the next 10 minutes just talking about his dad. And then towards the end of it, he almost cried and he was like, no one has ever asked me about my dad in my life, especially on like a podcast.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I'm just trying to like really listen, and a lot of times people kind of show that they don't want to care about it, but then when they kind of say it, you kind of figure out, okay, wait a minute, there is something. Then there is something here. Yeah, yeah,
I think I've learned this a lot. I've interviewed probably I've talked to over 6,000 customers in my tenure, and then I've interviewed probably well over 1,000 at this point. And you get really good at listening. You also get really good at understanding what people want to talk about and what real problems there are. And I think a lot of times with user research, particularly, you're not trying to ask questions. If you come in with an agenda, you're probably already on the wrong path. Um, you really want to come in saying, I don't know what to ask you. I'm here to learn. And I think when you start a conversation with that mentality where you're just like, you know, I'm going to frame it, I'm going to tell you the ideas that we're going to go down. Um, but this is your show. This is your time. This is your time to talk. And so a lot of times my user research, I did a call with someone recently. It was the same thing, scheduled for 30 minutes. We went for an hour and a half, and the whole time it was just I was just listening. And she just kept going, she kept going, kept going, kept going about, this in product operations and this in product operations, and oh my God, these problems and these problems and these problems. And I'm like, this is a trove of wealth. I mean, oh my God, do you
Yeah,
get so much knowledge out of people if you just, for lack of better
listen.
words, shut up and listen. Um,
I
and
agree with you
it is
completely.
it's so interesting. I love it. I really do love talking to people, and I also just love listening to people. I think it's so interesting. I'm going on a hike with my dad at the end of this year, um, and I brought these little microphone things where I have two microphones. I can put one on him, one on me, and then I connect it to my phone. And I'm just going to ask him to talk about his life. It's just for my own memories. Like we don't have our parents forever, and even when we do have them for longer than we thought we would, they lose a lot of their memories. They lose a lot of their knowledge of their life. And so my goal is like I want to talk to him about that. And I want to have him have a voice in my history and my life. I mean, as selfish as it might be, but like his life impacted the decisions he made that led me to who I am today and where I am today. And I'm interested in it. And I also want, if I end up having kids, I want my kids to have that opportunity to be able to listen to their grandpa when he was in his, 60s. Um, so it is, yeah, it's so interesting, and I love stories. Um, it's the best.
Well, Spencer, thank you for your time. This was fun.